Oke, kami persilahkan Bapak Nigel untuk memulai.
So everybody, welcome back. I hope you had a very good lunch. All right. So in this particular session, I actually want to talk about how organizations can leverage security intelligence to stay ahead of the game. Right. If you recall my keynote this morning, I was talking about how we as security professionals need to, be ahead of the cyber criminals. I probably want to just start off maybe just getting a show of hands, right? How many of you guys in this room are responsible for security? Okay, so I really hope that you guys can, feedback, ask questions, ask away, happy to answer anything. So, just to start off with, really talking about how, I've got to take a look at the slides. So talking about attacks. The attacks, as I mentioned earlier today, have just been growing at a phenomenal rate, right? And these are some of the little more, some more figures and numbers that you see, right? Average cost of a breach, I talked about those large breaches in 2014. Take all of them together, the average cost came out to about $3.5 million US per breach, right? Per data breach. Malware growth, right? And malware growth is directly related to targeted attacks that the attackers, the cyber criminals do, right? 614. So remember I told you it's an exponential graph. It's not growing at a rate of 2%, 20%, right? It's growing at a rate of 600%. It's massive, massive, massive amounts, right? And when I talked about silos, right? One organization, for example, one of our customers actually had 85 security tools from 45 different security vendors. All right? Imagine the complexity of trying to manage all that. And this is just security tools. Right? Showed you the slide earlier, right? Again, just to reiterate the point, it's exponential. We live in an exponential world. Our data is growing exponentially. The attackers, the cyber criminals, they're also getting exponential about their attacks. I wanted to share a little bit about the IBM Security Framework, right? And so this is where we as IBM Security have decided to make investments, right, into the solutions and how we've structured them. So basically the four key pillars that we're looking at is protecting people, protecting data, the application layer, protecting the application, and of course protecting the infrastructure. All right? So those are the four main areas of focus that IBM has when we either develop our solutions or we choose to acquire another company. And on top of all that, we talked about fraud, right? And the importance of looking at fraud, because as businesses move towards the internet, and nowadays the mobile, it is much more important to be able to look at those channels as well, right? So mobile and web fraud is something that we're also focused on. And around that is the security intelligence and analytics, right? To be able to analyze and gather whatever intelligence you can, all right, from all the solutions and all the controls that you have in these pillars. Now we talk about attacks, right? And today I'm talking about attacks. This is what some people call the attack chain. It could also be called the anatomy of a breach. It's basically all attacks follow these 5 main steps, all right? The first thing that the attackers will do is try and break in. All right, so they break into your infrastructure, your systems, and then they'll find a beachhead to latch on. All right, and so they'll grab on, and they'll use that as a launch pad to expand within your network. All right, your network, gather intel on where your data sits. All right, what looks interesting to them. All right, what exploits, what vulnerabilities could they exploit? Then they start gathering all your data, all right, gathering the information that they want. Could be your financial records, could be your personal identifier information, right? If you're a telco, it'll be your subscribers. If you're a bank, it could be your transactions, right? Credit card numbers, so on and so forth. So I wouldn't wish this on anybody in the room, of course, right? We want to stay safe, but it's something that we as the organization and as the targets have to be very, very cognizant of and be able to protect ourselves. There's a saying I like to say in security, right? We, as the defenders, we have to get lucky all the time. The attackers only have to get lucky once, all right? So we, as the security professionals, we have to be vigilant at all times. Okay. We'll talk about the various pillars of solutions that IBM has, and following this defense strategy of hardening, detecting, and then analyzing, all right? And it's a journey, and it keeps on going round and round, right? So you're always looking to harden, then be able to detect and analyze what comes after it. Okay, so let's look at the first step, right? And we were talking about hardening. So hardening, I mean, okay, question time, and I think there's a prize. Can somebody give me an idea of what they think hardening is? How do you harden cloud, right? You're moving now to the cloud. You're either using public cloud, or you may be contemplating setting up hybrids. How do you harden that, right? With the data that's growing, how do you cope? You've got new systems. You now have big data systems, right? Analytics, big data systems and analytics coming in, massive amounts of disk space, new appliances. How do you actually deal with that, right? And how do you secure that, right? And so these are some of the ways that IBM helps, right? And how we help our customers. With our endpoint manager, now branded as BigFix, right? It used to be BigFix, and now we're bringing that back again. We can then validate whether an endpoint is hardened and secure, right? With AppScan, we can determine if an application is vulnerable. With XGS, we can make sure that any traffic that's going across the network is protected, okay? And with Guardium, we can ensure that your databases and the activity that's happening on databases are audited and controlled, right? And all together, bringing that all together, is IBM QRadar, right? Which is basically the security intelligence platform that we have that tracks all these activities and events, right? And be able to then classify them on their criticality and type, right? And of course, we're getting those feeds in from our X-Force global intelligence feeds as well, right? So this is an example of how IBM helps our customers move forward in protecting their systems, right? And I'll go a little bit in depth. Let's talk a little bit of practically how this happens, right? We talk about endpoints, and we talk about a need to enforce baselines or enforce policies. We have the ability to make sure an endpoint is always in compliance, right? So we don't have to run scans, right? Because we know that they're compliant. And if they're not compliant, it'll tell us. Second thing is around the applications, right? We can scan for vulnerabilities, both while you're writing the code, as well as after that code has been deployed. Take all that, again, as I said, all this information is pulled into QRadar, and from there you have a single view and a single console to be able to identify, pick up what the major events are, and then decide which are the ones that you can act on, right? Yeah, and you can also run your own vulnerability assessments against it. The vulnerabilities that you find, right, with Risk Manager, you can actually prioritize. So let's say, for example, you find 100 vulnerabilities. Which one do you fix first? So this is an example, all right, within the console itself. The vulnerability manager actually conducts the scan, and is given, all vulnerabilities that is found is given a risk score, all right? So in this particular case, the risk score is 10. But we also know that this particular asset has previously communicated with a known malicious IP. Okay, so what's going to happen? I'm going to increase the risk score. All right. Now I also know that this asset, while it's vulnerable, on the endpoint manager, I know it's going to be scheduled to be fixed, to be patched. Okay, so I'm going to lower the risk score. And finally, I also know that in this particular asset is in a network segment that is not protected by a firewall. And growing number of employees means, obviously, we've got our access. The number of people who have access to our information has grown as well, right? So that number is something that we have to contend with, right? So that's one of the challenges. Secondly is how we access, right? Mobile, again, right? No longer are we sitting in a desktop in an office. We could be working from our home. We can be working out of Starbucks. We could be on the road driving a car with a handphone, and we could still be accessing corporate information. So that level of access has opened new avenues, right, for criminals to exploit, and something that we need to be aware of. Highly privileged, so I'm sure everybody here has got databases, right? Everybody runs databases. If you have a mess of directories, we can actually integrate all those directories, whether it be LDAP, Active Directory, right? Some sort of federation, we can actually integrate all that, right, to a common pool. Privileged Identity Manager, I talked about your administrators, right? We can actually identify who has access to those shared privilege accounts as well, all right? And Identity Manager, Security Identity Manager, actually helps provision that account from the time that the user joins the organization to the time he leaves, right? And we can deprovision it as well, right? So that end-to-end management is something that we can that IBM helps, right? And this is how you can, as an organization, you can ensure that you're better secured, right? And of course, we can pull this information as well into QRadar, right? The security intelligence platform. We have that ability to then identify who has access to what. So again, let me talk about a practical use case, all right? Imagine if you pick up on your network that this user has got a malware infection, all right? So you know he's got a malware infection. But this user is also now accessing critical information. Risk score, all right, goes up, all right? So then you know which event to act on first, okay? Now let's talk about detection, all right? So we've done the hardening, we've talked about the ability to detect. And very similarly, all right, we have that ability, again, XGS to be able to block any exploits that traverse, right, that try to detect and block any exploits that cut across the network. If there are attacks that are coming in from the internet, right, Access Manager will be able to pick those up. If somebody is trying to do something funny like an SQL injection, we can pick that up and stop it before it actually hits the application. Okay, so practical examples again, right? You can see here if an email with a malicious link comes in, all right, we've got the solution through XGS to actually block that. All right. And there's some more details that I can go in through here. SQL, I'll give you an example of an SQL injection, right? And what happens, privilege escalation, and an email with the malicious files, right? So I've got a few more screenshots. We're running out of time, so I'll just speed up here. So this is threat intelligence, right? First example, okay? So let's say an email comes in, all right? And it's got a link, all right, that you know that it would lead you to a bad website. How do you know that website's bad? Okay. Second level, the second example was about SQL injections, all right? So let's say somebody runs app scan and finds that there's an SQL injection. It will send this vulnerability over to our IPS, XGS, okay? And it would actually create a virtual patch to be able to patch that site. So you don't actually have to do anything with the site. The site can still be vulnerable. But because you have XGS in front of it, it has now automatically created a virtual patch, right, for you, right? So that's our combination of our app scan to find the vulnerability integrated with XGS, our network-based IPS, right? Right, so where was about privilege manager escalation. So let's say somebody who's not supposed to request an escalation does, a privilege ID does. Okay, I've got to move really fast now. So if somebody who doesn't have, who's not supposed to have this ID actually does get a privilege ID, that's actually detected, and what happens is we have the ability to then monitor what that guy is doing. So we take a recording of what he's doing. All right? This then you can go and play back and analyze it to be able to determine what he did, right? Whether it's a breach or something bad, right? So that's something that we can do. Okay. Right. We'll talk about the last part, which is analysis. All right. And one of the big problems now is the network and the infrastructure and everything else, right? The applications are all generating huge amounts of data. How do we then mine this information, this amount of data, to get tangible, actionable information from it? All right? And that could be either network type activities, what we call flows, events which are coming in from all your firewalls and your IPSs, or information about your assets, right? And how critical they are. So we have that ability to pull in all that network information either through our Q flow, V flows, right? So we know what's happening on the network. Obviously, traditionally, we will pick up information from your firewalls and security devices and pull in all the assets that you have, and we can even map out your entire network topology, right, automatically. And based on all that information, we can then, again, with X-Force, we can then identify, right, or particular threats or events, right, and notify you ahead of time. Okay. Talk about. I talked a little bit about the need, right? So to harden, detect, and then analyze, all right? Across the across your environment, and making sure, right, and you have security intelligence behind this, that integration, it's intelligence and integration across all these solutions to be able to do this. Okay, and we obviously, the world is not a silo, so we as IBM, we don't work by ourselves. We also integrate with a lot of these other partners as well. These are all our partners. All right. If you take a look at the slide and you wanted to know what our IBM security portfolio is, all right, these are the sets that we have. All right, this is our full portfolio. Okay, and just the last thing I'll leave you with, the IBM framework, and if you need anything that's to do with securing your people, your identities, securing your data, securing your application, securing your infrastructure, the intelligence and the fraud that goes around it, right? IBM has the solutions for it. Okay? And certainly we have the intelligence, the integration, and the expertise, right, to deliver this to you. Okay? You see this line here, advanced fraud protection. So we talk about banking and that. We have that ability to detect if the endpoint is a risky endpoint and therefore has malware. And because of that, when he's trying to access that banking website, we can then either quarantine the transaction, right? Or, I mean, we could block it, or we could just quarantine for further investigation, right? So if he tries to make a transfer, right, we'd actually stop that transfer first. So that's part of our web fraud capability through our Trustier solution. Yep. Happy to talk to you more about that. Yeah, just come and see us and we can discuss it. Right? So I think I'm out of time. I'll hand it back over for the closing remarks.